This is the Life Sciences Leadership Show. I'm your host, Michael Piperno, and I'm a leadership communication coach and facilitator who specializes in the life sciences industry. On each episode of this show, I interview industry leaders from organizations of all sizes about their leadership journeys. My goal for the show is to help you gain leadership insights and knowledge that'll help you in your own life sciences leadership journey. Okay, on with the show. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me for the show today. I'm so excited to have my guest here today. We have Ramani Varanasi. She's a biotech executive and founder and managing director of Revive Advisors, and founder and former president and CEO of Xbiotics Therapeutics. So, Ramani, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be here and really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, I'm really glad you accepted the invite to the show because you and I have had some great conversations over the past couple months about leading, especially in the biotech arena. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today, and I think my listeners are really going to enjoy it. So let's start, Ramani, with you just giving us a brief overview of your leadership journey to date, how you got to where you are.
Absolutely. Well, let me start off, Michael, by saying that nothing is ever a straight line, right? This is sort of a parody on life at some level, but I meandered just like many of us do. You know, I started off as a scientist. I was in college, very much a STEM person. I'm Canadian, by the way, so I did not go to university undergraduate here, but I did it up there, and we have as much STEM there as there is in the US, clearly. But very much, started off as a scientist, really wanted to actually get into the medical field because as a South Asian and a South Asian woman, it was sort of not drilled into my head, but that was what the community sort of expected. And so I kind of veered away, though, from the pure doctor, lawyer, engineer triad and did something that was somewhat different. Wanted to go into academic research. And so after pursuing an undergraduate, went on to do graduate work with the intention of becoming an academic. And lo and behold, I found out that I was being pigeonholed in the context of my academic work. And I wasn't seeing the big picture. And so, oftentimes we tell ourselves to really see the story or to really understand a specific detail, you need to take a step back. Well, so I decided that was what I was going to do. So I took a huge step back and said, even though I was successful at the bench and on my way to sort of leading a lab, I thought, what else is out there? How can the work that I'm doing from a research perspective translate into something that is truly patient-centric? And I, given the research I was doing, which was heavily bench and lab focused, didn't have the opportunity to see that. And so what I decided to do was switch into an industry which was really in its infancy back then. So I'm dating myself a little, but it was in its infancy. And I said, let me go into biotech. What does biotech mean? I didn't know. All I knew was there were these big pharmaceutical companies developing drugs, and they were developing them to treat patients. And I thought, wow, that's impact. So how can I be a part of that? Somewhat of a naive perspective, but yet also sort of fueled from the foundation of, what I don't want to do, let me figure out what I do want to do. And so it was kind of curiosity that led me to a company called Merck as a biochemist. And so I was at the bench again, but in the context of drug development program and with the opportunity to think about how what I was doing would impact patients. And I did that for a little bit, and big pharma is big pharma for someone like me who likes to move and shake and make things happen and kind of a go-getter mindset. It was a little bit of a slow-paced environment. And so again, my curiosity got the better of me and said, well, what does a smaller company look like? What would it feel like? Could I be successful there? So I did a full 180. I went from being at Merck to a startup company, completely bypassed the whole middle piece of everything and went right to an early stage company where I was actually the head scientist and I was building a lab, and I was actually also pitching to investors. Because we were fundraising and building at the same time, as most or all biotechs do. And then I got exposed to the fundraising side of the world because of what I was doing at that company. And that's when a whole other piece of sort of latent excitement started to bubble up in me and said, wow, there's more to biotech than just doing research and getting drugs into patients. There's a whole business piece to it because one doesn't happen without the other. And so that was my first foray into the world of business. But then I moved very quickly over to a company called Millennium, where I stayed in the science realm, but with very much a business mindset. And again, in the early days of Millennium, which is now Takeda, it was very much if you put your mind to it, you can just make it happen mindset. And so that was where I got the opportunity to move into business development because I saw some colleagues doing things I thought I'd be good at and I would enjoy. And they were also really wearing nice clothes and having nice offices. So I thought,
Right.
it'd be nice to have that as well. So that's what led me to the world of business development at Millennium. And that's really where my corporate career started. And I got the opportunity to, cut my teeth on many deals at Millennium and work through the corporate ladder to get to a position where I was not only doing, but I was also enabling and influencing. And that's what I think my journey to leadership really reflects, which is the opportunity to now influence in the context of an environment or an organization. And then from Millennium, I transitioned into multiple CBO or chief business officer roles at a handful of biotech companies in the Boston area. Then I got, opened myself up to the notion of entrepreneurship, meaning, I'd been part of companies that had started up, but I was never really the founder. I was never really the first person there. And so I had the opportunity at two companies to actually co-found them, one in the oncology space or immuno-oncology space, and the other in the infectious disease space. And I was, I decided I was going to step into the CEO-ship of that infectious disease company, Xbiotics Therapeutics, and run it. And again, there were people along the way that allowed me to navigate that journey and allowed me to elevate myself while also elevating me on their own. And so that was my journey from sort of scientist to science leadership to business development person to business executive. And it was really not a straight line. I had never envisioned from the first day I started at in the lab, I should say, that I would ever be a CEO. But there I was. And I'm glad I took those jumps and trusted my ability to execute on what I thought would be a fun journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that you have a meandering path just like I do in my work. And frankly, like a lot of people that I know, it's funny when I coach people who are more on the beginning of their leadership journey, they're often looking for that linear path. Like, how do I get to? This is what I want. How do I get there? Help me, mentor me. And sure, mentorship is wonderful. And like you said, people helped you and supported you. People have helped me and supported me. But I always tell people, that path is probably not going to be straight. There's going to be ups and downs and setbacks and risks and decisions and all of that. I mean, like you started in your scientific career. I started in academia, thinking academia was going to be my career, learned pretty quickly that wasn't going to be right for me, went into big corporate, just like you learned that wasn't fast paced enough for me. Ended up, it's kind of funny when you were talking, I was like, oh, similarities a long way. I ended up in the world of at a medical communications agency, first exposure to the pharmaceutical world, to improving the lives of patients, first exposure to how hard it was to get therapies to people who needed them. And what I learned there, Ramani, was the people who had all the fancy letters after their last names, MD, PhD, wanted to work with me because I was able to translate. I was in a creative department. I was able to translate the science to creative that they could actually use. At least I think that's why they liked working with me. So it's just funny. Like I always tell people I've changed careers 4 times, but I really haven't. It's just been the journey.
Well, and I think, Michael, if I can just add, that's the beauty of being in any industry, right? That's the beauty of having a career. It's like it is what you make of it. And certainly in the biopharma, biotech space, we can have adjacencies that we lean into like weakly or strongly that can actually redefine who we are and how we operate, right? We can have multiple lives. There is an opportunity to have multiple lives. And so I was fortunate enough, to as a scientist to kind of ask the questions of people to say, what else can I do? Is there something else? And then biotech, as I said, was so early in its infancy. This is back in the day when Genentech or Cetus were the only biotech companies out there, maybe Biogen as well. So, this is a long time ago. Biotech is not what it is. I mean, today is so different from what it was many, many, many years ago. Anyway, it was sort of, for me, it was about charting into uncharted territories.
Yeah.
And it's always like, you have like one foot in the zone of comfort, and then the other foot is reaching out to say, well, what else can I do? And so that's what my journey was like. And I think, to your point, there is nothing linear about life. Similarly, there is nothing linear about our careers. And so I think we just have to lean into that. And that's what has helped me sort of meander through, which is I like to hike. And when you hike, you kind of meander as well. And, you kind of stop to smell the roses once in a while. And then you're like, oh no, I got to hurry up because the sun is setting. So I got to reach that peak before the sun sets. And so there's a little bit of a hustle factor there. But anyway, I think there's lots of leadership lessons I learned along the way, and happy to talk more about them as we go through this discussion.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely want to dive into those. But I also want to touch on, because it's a subject that comes up a lot in my work, is that leap from the big pharma to the biotech world. Because it is, for many people, for some people, it's like, no, I want that. I want that. I want that environment. I want that fast pace. The risk is totally worth it. And to others, for whatever reason it is, maybe they're longer in their career and it's a financial decision, or, there's so much risk that can come to that, that a lot of people are afraid to do it. When you made that leap, how did that go? Was it bumpy? Was it smooth for you? Did it just feel right and that's why you did it? Or was it a no-brainer for you? It's just what you had to do at the time?
All the above.
Okay.
Let me clarify. Things are always bumpy because you never know, like a plane, you expect it to land completely smoothly, but no plane ever lands completely smoothly. There's a couple bumps as you're touching the tarmac, right?
Right.
Similarly, so when I jumped from my jump was from Merck into a small company called Quantum Biotech back in Montreal, which is where I did all this. Quantum was a company of 5 people. Merck was a company of how many? 500,000 or maybe not 500,000, 50,000, huge. So I did it because I just was curious about the unknown. So it was a leap of faith. In some respects, people might say that was too much of a risk, and perhaps it was, but I find that no risk, no reward. And so it was bumpy because I didn't know what to expect. And at some level, when you don't know what to expect, you do have an expectation of something. So I thought, I'm going to have a nice cushy office, or I'm going to have everything laid out for me in terms of what's where and who to talk to. And it was none of that. It was sort of like, here you go, Ramani, here's an empty lab, fill it, figure out what research projects are strategically appropriate for us to work on, hire the people. By the way, you don't have any money to do that, so go fundraise also along with the CEO. So it was one of those. I was thriving though, because this notion of I am learning, I'm doing things I've never done before, and I might fail, but who cares? Because I'm having fun, and at some point we're always moving forward. And so I took it was a bumpy ride, don't get me wrong, but it was also one of these, just like a roller coaster, is very exciting, very scary, but at the end it's a thrill. And so, I don't want to downplay all the days and nights where you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? But in the grand scheme of life, I think with biotech in general, we're taking risks every day. And that mindset has been consistent for me and with me throughout my career. So for me, it was a no-brainer. Just to come back to the options you gave me, I would say all the above. But at the end of the day, it really was a no-brainer because I knew that staying in pharma was not going to satisfy me because it was too lenient, too slow. It was not progressing at the rate that I wanted it to, or maybe I wasn't feeling like I had the kind of impact and influence that I was hoping to have. And I could have much more of that in a smaller environment. Now, I would not recommend people go from a big pharma to the type of company I went to, maybe take a couple of steps down and do it in a stepwise fashion. But no regrets, right, at the end of the day. Yeah,
it's funny because when I went from the larger corporation to that smaller agency environment, it was a little bit scary with that, but it was such a good boot camp for my entrepreneurial side that had been simmering, but that I didn't really realize, I didn't have the experience to know that I could function in that kind of fast-paced, uncertain, risky environment. But then when I learned I did, it was like the best boot camp I could have asked for with brilliant people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, absolutely, and there is no playbook. There is no playbook for how one should navigate through their career. It's just you feel it. You see opportunities, you have to be prepared, and then you sort of seek opportunities, and then you try to jump into them. And if
Right.
they're not the right ones, you jump into something else. So I think you kind of create your own playbook along the way. And that's what I did. And I took calculated risks, but they were risks,
Right.
sometimes very high risks at the end of the day. When you're young and naive, you just are full of optimism. You're just like
Right.
so
Right.
optimistic about everything you do, and then the realism starts to set in. So, but yeah, no regrets on that decision and how I made those jumps or that particular jump because it's led me to where I am today.
Sure, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about when you moved into that first time CEO role, because you and I have had some great conversations about what a successful biotech CEO looks like the things that are good and the things maybe that these people should avoid or that people have blind spots about and all of that kind of stuff. So when you moved into that, your first time being a CEO, tell me a little bit about that. How was that adjustment for you? What did you know? What did you not know? What did you learn really quickly? Because I know that, I mean, a lot of my audience for this podcast is quite diverse, but I know that there are people out there from talking to them that aspire to have that role one day and know that it's probably going to be on the smaller mid-sized biotech and would be curious to hear about someone's experience like you in that first time in the role.
No, absolutely, Michael. Happy to address that. So I'll start off by saying that becoming a first-time CEO for me was effectively a full circle experience. And what I mean by that is I'm a microbiologist by background, and I did a lot of research in that area. And I ended up co-founding and ultimately becoming the CEO of this company that we co-founded called Xbiotics, which is an antimicrobial or anti-infectious diseases company. So I felt like I was doing full circle from the first day I sort of started off as a scientist at the bench to where I was 30 some odd years later, 25 years later, being a CEO of a company that brought me right back to the science realm that I loved years ago. So it was full circle from that perspective. It was, I didn't plan to launch that company along with colleagues, my co-founders, and to run it. It kind of just happened, as a lot of things in life do. You prepare yourself for something, as I said, you see opportunities, and then you kind of see if there's a connection there, and all of a sudden, bam, there's a connection. And so we ended up launching the company out of another company. We spun it out, accessed a technology and licensed some screening technology for chemical matter. My Harvard co-founders brought some IP and some know-how to the company, and we essentially launched it. What I knew was where we wanted to go, where we wanted to get to. What I didn't know as a first-time CEO is how to get there.
Right. Yeah, of course.
And so it's like, oops, okay, well, let's figure it out. But that comes very quickly because the intuition of where you want to get to supports the process to get there. And, it's all about the team, right? So when we talk about what I thought about as a first-time CEO, or what one of my key areas of focus is making sure that we had a clear vision and a purpose. And we had that. We knew what our vision was. We knew what our purpose was. We just weren't sure early on. We knew in the early stages of how to get there, which is let's screen these compounds against these particular targets and look at these indications. But there were a lot of these sort of drug development processes that I was not a detailed expert on.
Right.
But I could build a team around me, right? And that's the other thing that as a first-time CEO, we're really kind of wary of doing, because it means you have to show vulnerability and that you don't know it all.
Right.
And so it was kind of a little bit of a rude reckoning for me, where I was like, wait, I don't know it all. So I have to build a team around me with people that are real experts in A, B, and C. And so, building and leading teams is something that is dependent on having the right scientific, the right clinical, the right business expertise, and also knowing how to bring the right fractional or outsourced support. And so for first-time CEOs, there's so many things you're trying to think about. You have to talk to investors, fundraising. Now, I'd had some experience with that both in my time at Millennium and my other companies I was at, because I'd fundraised heavily before. But you have to translate that complex science into a clear business case.
Right.
And then you have to show investors that you're able to execute. And so there were so many of these things that as a first-time CEO, you don't realize you have to think about. But once you're in that chair, you automatically think about them. It just comes. And then you just figure out how to navigate it by having the right people around you. So it's a little bit of an organic process, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's, I mean, from my perspective, sitting here, hearing your story, it's so positive that you have the scientific experience, but then you got that business acumen experience through your experience. And then before you got into that CEO role, so you were you had an awareness of maybe not all the pieces, but a lot of the pieces. Because what I see a lot of times in my travels with CEOs is sometimes it's a brilliant scientific CEO who doesn't understand the business side or the storytelling side or the stakeholder alignment that needs to happen, and the translating, like you said, the science to a business case. And it's not that they can't do it, but it's not. That hasn't really been their thing. And then I have, I've got CEOs who I know that I've coached that have but very little scientific background or experience, but they're heavy on the business case. But like you said, they're really good at putting that right team together, and they're not shy about it. They're not shy to say what they don't know.
Yep.
And that's critically important, because that's one of the things I wanted to ask you is like if you want to become a CEO, it's like, how do you how important is the scientific literacy versus the business acumen? Or is it not a straightforward thing?
Yeah. It's not a straightforward thing. And, a lot of people ask that question. It comes up in conversation all the time, because there are lots of people who want to become CEOs, and they either they many times don't have the right scientific acumen or background, not acumen, but background in this case. And the question is, well, can I really do it? And it comes back to the notion of, yes, you don't have to be a know-it-all. You don't have to know it all. You can actually hire the right people. Now, that is easier said than done, depending on the type of company you want to be the CEO of. So for instance, if you are looking to run a company that is very early stage, that is probably at the seed stage, maybe pre-seed or seed stage, that is heavily scientifically focused, that's going to need someone who can kind of drive scientific strategy and bring in a business partner as either a co-founder or a team member, then you're going to have to be strong on the science side. But if you're looking at a more established company that's got a little bit of a pipeline and that's got a strategy to get things into the clinic, and the science strategy is for the most part set, and now you're really just thinking about executing, having a business CEO is probably a better thing at that. So it really depends on what stage of company you're at. And also how complex the science is ultimately. For myself, as you said, I am fortunate in that I can speak to the science. I can certainly execute on the business side as well. And I've said in many instances, I can play a CMO on TV when required. I can play a CFO when required. When the real things go down, I bring the real colleagues into the room.
Right.
But the point is, I think as a CEO, again, it comes down to, you don't have to be a know-it-all. You don't have to know everything. The key is knowing what you don't know and then bringing in the right people to fill those gaps, to support the endeavor and to support the execution of the vision and the mission of the company.
Right. Bring in the right people and then motivate them, keep them retained, I mean, it's not an easy task to do all that.
It's not an easy task. And, the other thing is, since you mentioned like bring people in and building teams, and we talked about leadership early on, being, especially in today's environment where there are such big headwinds to what everyone's doing from a company building, company launching, and company growth perspective, empathetic leadership, I think, is so critical for either a first-time CEO or any CEO to have, because here, success of a company is not just about science or the deals, the business. It's about the people, right? And you have to show a humanness to the people that are around you, and show show vulnerability as the CEO, to have them turn around and do the same, and then to really turn around and build the company together as a team. So it's a community effort. Biotech is a team effort. It's not a solo effort. And so I think in today's environment especially, but in any circumstance, leading with empathy is, I think, something that CEOs, first time or not, often don't gravitate to, because they think that it perhaps might mean that they're soft and that they're weak. And so that's so critical. And I mention that because it is so critical in today's times. There are so many things happening with rifts and company shutdowns and employees being so stressed that in order to be successful as a company, you have to turn inward to the people. And that requires one showing empathy and, demonstrating empathetic leadership. And this is something that I spend time talking to the folks I work with, some first-time CEOs I'm advising. A lot of stress everywhere, but really at the end of the day, take that breath and show that we're all vulnerable and we're all in this together. And as a team, we'll.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's so critically important, because when you allow that empathy strength and that vulnerability strength, they are strengths, they're not weaknesses, they're not soft. Unfortunately, in the past, they've been looked at as that way. But when you allow those things, the appropriate vulnerability and empathy, when you allow those things to be strengths, what does it do? It allows people to speak up. It allows people to take appropriate risks without fear, and it makes the team trust each other. Mm-hmm. And when you have a team that trusts each other, they go the extra mile. Mm-hmm. They want to show up for each other. It's almost magical, the leaders who can do that and do that well. So I'm really glad you brought that up. I actually was on a webinar the other day where someone asked me, what leadership advice do you wish you had gotten when you were younger? And I said, in my early leadership days, I wish I allowed myself to use my natural strengths of empathy and humility, and I allowed myself to be the quiet leader that I was. I was trying to pretend to be someone I wasn't. Yeah. Because I didn't want to look weak. But actually, those things are actually what make me strong as a leader. I know that now. I didn't know that then.
Absolutely. I mean, similarly, in my career, there have been many times where, I felt vulnerable, but I never showed it. I never wanted to show it because I didn't want to be labeled as someone who's weak or incapable or just unable to handle the stress or handle the challenges. And so, you put up this wall, this sort of like facade, this mask of who you think you should be. And you're trying to kind of shine some authenticity through those little pinholes, but it doesn't come through. And so you take that mask off. And I think taking that mask off just allows people to kind of breathe a little bit and say, okay, we're all in this, so let's figure it out together. And to your point, trust, and the other thing I would add is respect, right? Yeah. Trust and respect are the foundation of a good company, a good team, a good cohesive effort. And as a CEO, it's your responsibility to articulate how that's going to happen. How are you going to build that team that is super cohesive? So what do people say often? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Is that the saying?
I think so.
Right.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
if you're able to show empathy and be vulnerable and set the type of culture where there's a psychological safety, space of psychological safety where people can speak up, then all of a sudden you're kind of on a whole different tangent to success.
Right. Absolutely. And I love that you brought up respect, because I'm always in a lot of my programs, I teach the fact that, and I coach on the fact that, when trust and respect are intact, that's when you can respectfully disagree. That's when you can challenge each other in a respectful way, because it's not personal. It's not a personal attack. Positive regard and respect stay intact, and guess what? That's where creativity and innovation live.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're squashing that, and your team doesn't have that, you're going to have a bunch of doers and no innovators.
Absolutely.
And it's a fact.
Absolutely. And let me just turn that a little bit outward. So that's sort of speaking from the inside the company perspective, but that same notion of trust is applicable on the external side. So as a CEO, you can't overpromise or hype anything to investors or to your employees, frankly, because if you can't deliver, you have just lost their trust, right? Like you cannot hold yourself high and go back to them for a second or third pitch because that door is now shut. And so the notion of trust and respect, I mean, is so pervasive throughout how companies are built, or so critical to building companies that can be respected within the industry. Again, lots of CEOs take the misstep of saying, oh yeah, well, of course we can do that. Oh, we're going to do this, and this. And investors are like, are you really sure you can do that? And I think in CEOs, it's first-time CEOs in particular, there's a sense of, if I don't tell them I can do it, then they're going to think I'm not a good CEO. So they tend to overpromise without even realizing it. Right. So anyway, I totally agree. Trust is so critical.
Yeah, no, it is. And I'm glad you talked about that kind of overpromising and how that can be a misstep, because my next question for you, Ramani, was going to be, what pitfalls or mistakes have you seen CEOs make? Or I know you advise a lot of CEOs. Like, what are some things that either first time or really any CEOs should watch out for? What are those pitfalls that you've seen?
Yeah. So, when we're pitching to a lot of what a CEO does is fundraise, right? And so anytime you talk to a CEO, one of the first questions is, how's your fundraising going? And if they're not actively fundraising, they're still fundraising. So you still ask the same question. So I think overpromising is one misstep, clearly. But also chasing every shiny opportunity, trying to say, hey, we can do this and we can do that. And we've got this lead program, we've got 3 backups, and we've got this second program and third program, and we've got this massive pipeline, and look at all the value we're going to create without focusing. Because at the end of the day, if you are missing even one milestone, you're losing the trust of the investors, as we talked about earlier.
Sure.
So, trying to do a lot with a little is challenging. So the recommendation there often is, how about you try to just change doing a lot to doing a little less with that very little funding you have? Because for CEOs running smaller biotech companies, and that's what I'm focusing on right now, every dollar counts, and you've got to maintain that cash runway or extend it to survive. And unless you're hitting milestones or have a high chance of hitting a milestone, investors are not going to be taking you seriously or looking to fund you. Chasing every opportunity dilutes the effort. So I would say focus, focus, focus. And this is something I've been told when I was CEO running my company. The other thing is, just kind of switching gears a little bit, when we hit a milestone, everyone's happy, everything's peachy, we're all excited, breaking open the bottle of champagne. But then when it comes to data that's less stellar or not so exciting or bad news, we don't want to disclose that as freely and as transparently. And I would argue that that's shooting ourselves in the foot, right? Both with employees as well as with investors.
Yeah.
And so I would say, don't sugarcoat bad news. Like, be transparent with the wins and the losses, because the losses are not really losses. They're just data points that allow you to move forward to get the next win. And so sugarcoating bad news and not being transparent is another misstep that I've seen CEOs do. And then finally, I'll say either not hiring the right people or clinging to the wrong people, because team, we talked about, is so critical.
Yeah.
Hiring the right people is so critical. And there's this one CEO I'm working with right now who wants to hire everybody. This person speaks to a potential candidate, and they say, I want to hire this person. They're just, because they want to portray that they've got a strong team, but they're sort of jumping corners and not really doing the right diligence. And it's this eagerness to build a company, but you have to take a step back and again, let things happen naturally and organically. And so waiting too long to hire is also a misstep. And then hiring the wrong people because you're moving too quickly, which oftentimes first-time CEOs do, is often a big misstep, because once that team is in place, it's very difficult to get rid of them.
Yeah.
As we know, it's easier to hire than it is to let people go.
Sure.
So really, really making the effort to do the right level of diligence and to take things in a slower, progressive manner is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I can keep going. There's so much out there, but I would say those are the top 3 that come to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and being intentional about who you're bringing on and the why and the strategy behind it and all of that. And I get it. You're excited and you think you found the right fit and all of that, but you really have to be intentional about it, especially when cash is tight, and you need to make sure that you're being smart about the decisions that you're making, for sure.
Yeah. Actually, if I can just add one more thing, Michael, that popped to my mind, because I think about this a lot. I've talked recently with a few people about the definition of success and failure. And, we as CEOs, because of the way the industry is built and run, equate success with financial success. IPOs, acquisitions, how much did you raise? Did you sell? I think that narrow lens of success does a disservice to the team, the employees, and to the effort overall. So I would say, don't just focus on those big milestones of success. Celebrate the smaller successes along the way, because that's what motivates people to keep moving forward. Acknowledge that success doesn't have to be defined through that narrow aperture of dollars in, or how quickly you're moving. It's all about, are you doing things in the right way? Is the science being conducted appropriately? Is it intentional? And are you ultimately running the right trial to the right, to get the right drug to the patient? We can't lose the idea of patient centricity, which oftentimes gets kind of pushed to the wayside when you think about success definitions.
Sure. Yeah. No, I love that. Well, one more question, Ramani, and then I'm going to ask you to tell folks about how they can reach out to you if they'd like to learn more about you. What is either, I'll give you the question I got yesterday. What is either a piece of advice you wish you had gotten when you were stepping into that first-time CEO role, or a piece of advice you would give to someone who is about to do that or aspires to step into that role?
Yeah. I would say it's a long game. I would say don't rush. Things don't happen overnight. I wanted things to happen yesterday. Things will happen organically. The process will work as long as you're putting the right inputs into the process. And so I would say take a step back, take a breath, get the right people around you, and then move with intentionality. Move with intentionality, because if you are doing things somewhat stochastically, nothing will come together. You can create calmness in chaos by being intentional about things and knowing that really we're in this to treat the patient, to get to the patient, and that will not happen overnight. It cannot happen overnight. So you're in this for the long run. This is not a home run in a 1 week affair. This is really, you got to buckle down or settle in, buckle down, and be ready for the long ride, which it really translates to be patient.
Right.
Patient for the patients, for the patient, I
Patient
guess.
for the patients. I love that. That's awesome. Wonderful advice, Ramani. Well, listen, thank you so much for being willing to come on the show today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think that what we talked about, I'm all about helping people by sharing people's experiences, and I hope we accomplished that today. So I hope the folks listening enjoyed our conversation and I'm sure they got some value out of it. So listen, how can people find out more about you?
Well, the best way is really LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I post once in a while. I like to read a lot of posts on LinkedIn. There's a lot of great content on there. So LinkedIn is the best way to find me.
Terrific. And I'll make sure I put a link to your LinkedIn profile into our show notes so people can click through to that if they'd like to reach out. So Ramani, this was wonderful. Thank you so much again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. This was so much fun. Appreciate you asking me to join.
Of course. Thanks for listening to the show today. If you enjoyed it, please rate it on your favorite podcast platform and tell one colleague or friend about it. Thanks. We'll see you next time. The Life Sciences Leadership Show is brought to you by the Comvia Group, experts in leadership communication coaching and training for life sciences leaders. Learn more at www.wearecomvia.com. That's WEARARE, Comvia, COMVIA.com.